Hey, so the next financial area we're going to cover is prearranging and prefunding. So prearranging is when you go into a funeral home and you start a file essentially for yourself, whether it just be your name in a file and a copy of your life insurance paperwork or a copy of your discharge paper, or if you have a full pre-funded funeral with all of your biographical information, all of your selections made. So there's a huge range of things you can do when you pre-fund or prearrange your funeral. One thing I always start with when somebody wants to come in and sit down is asking them what has brought them there and what they want to accomplish. Because people come in with a lot of different agendas for that prearranging and pre-funding. I've had people come in and they literally just want to put down a name of a song that they want at their funeral and have it on file. All the way up to people who want to have every last detail of their funeral cared for and put in place and all the financials in place. So there's a huge range. So it's what you want to accomplish, what you want to have set in stone ahead of time. So you can go into a funeral home, like I've told you before, at any time and get a general price list. So if you just want to look at the financial part of pre-funding and prearranging, you can do that. You can walk in, ask for a price list, take it with you to look over with your family. You can do this at as many funeral homes as you'd like. So to some people, that is peace of mind, is just knowing financially how much money you need to have in place. Now, putting funds in place, there's a few different reasons you would do that and that you would put a lot more of your information in place. One is easing the burden, as many people say. You can't ease the burden of your loss from someone's life, but those selections and gathering all your information together after your death can already be done. That does ease the burden of wondering what you want and wondering what the heck was mom's mother's maiden name. You know, just gathering that information afterwards. So it does ease that burden. You also can lock in the pricing. So if you do it at a younger age, say you prearrange and pre-fund when you're 40 and you live to your 80, prices double about every 15 years within the funeral industry. So that's, you know, let's say 40 years later, you've saved a substantial amount of money by pre-funding that funeral. And then also having your wishes somewhere. Telling your family, you know what, I have put down all of my wants, all of my needs, everything I want for my services is at such and such funeral home. So when the time comes, you can go there and it's all in place. That is a huge relief to your family when the time does come. You can make arrangements then prior to death so things are in place for your family and you can do as little or as much as you want. You can get all your biographical information down, you can write your obituary, you can select your merchandise, or much more that you want to do. So where is that money kept? So when it comes to pre-funding, a lot of people are wondering where that money actually goes. So the funeral home does not hold that money. That money goes to a third party in a trust or in a life insurance. So I'm going to talk about a trust first. So what happens is your money is given to the funeral home with typically a check that is written out to this third party place. You do not write the check out to the funeral home. Write it out to the third party because that's where it needs to go to be invested for your trust. You're essentially setting up a bank account for yourself for your funeral. It will grow interest. You will also get a tax statement on that interest because this is always your money. It is your checking account or savings account essentially for your funeral. So you will get a tax form every year for the interest that's in that account. Now, because that money never goes to the funeral home, this also ensures you that that funeral home is not going to be spending your money in that in between. You've all seen the news stories where funeral homes spend the money and then the money's gone and it's misappropriated, and that's what happens is it goes through the funeral home, and so the funeral home will hold the money for a while before they send it to this third party. Well, then sometimes it gets spent by these funeral homes that you see on the news, and it's, I think, a slippery slope. Once they do it once, they do it twice, and they don't realize how much of this money they're spending, so then when it's needed, when these people start dying, it's not there. And that's when the trouble occurs. So write it to the third party to ensure that your money is going right into where you want it to go. Now, locking in the price. So once that contract is written out, you must select your things so that there's a contract attached to the trust. Same would be with the life insurance. You need to have a contract from the funeral home attached to the life insurance, so that way every line item is accounted for as to why that money is going into that account. Once those things are paid for in full, your service items, so like the basic services of the funeral home and staff, the visitation, the service, the graveside, and the merchandise, the casket, the vault, urn, the printed material, the price of those items are locked in with that funeral home. So as inflation happens down the road, your pricing is never going to change on those items. You are not going to owe more. You're not going to have to pay more at the time of death as long as you follow that plan. Now, cash advance items, which are what are paid out on your behalf at the time, so like the cemetery charge, like the opening and closing of the grave, let's say the pastor, the obituary, things of that nature can never be locked in place because they're not controlled by the funeral home. They're a third-party outsourced item that the funeral home covers the cost of for you in their bill. So what you can do is at the time that you make this prearrangement, you would put in what today's costs are for those items. What I recommend to people is that every few years, every 3 to 5 years, go back to the funeral home, check in and say, hey, should I put a little more money towards those cash advance items? Because you may put $500 towards a cemetery and a month later they could raise their price $1,000. There's nothing, to stop them from doing that, and it's not controlled by the funeral home. So you want to check in and make sure that there hasn't been any huge jumps in the numbers. Some of your interest is going to go towards offsetting those costs, but not all of it. So you want to check in and make sure that there's not going to be any surprise costs for your family when the time comes. This also allows you to look at what you selected before and make sure that that plan still works for you and for your family. Now, what if the funeral home closes? This is a huge question. What if that funeral home closes? Where does my money go? Do I lose my money? No, because your money is with a third party. It's in a trust. It is not with that funeral home. So that funeral home can close. Your account and your money is still there in that third party trust. And so you will then go to another funeral home and say, I have this trust set up. Here's the amount that I have. Now, what you did lose was the guarantee that you had with the funeral home that closed. What you can do, though, is talk to the other funeral home, and what I have found, depending on the situation, some funeral homes may try to honor that guarantee that was set with the closing funeral home in the new funeral home. So they'll try and help you if they can, and some may just say, okay, you've got this lump sum, what would you like to do with us at our funeral home, and kind of start over. Basically, hey, you have $10,000 in this account, let's make new arrangements with us and put that money towards things and lock them in today. So there's a few different ways you can do it if that was the situation. But that money's always yours. Now, what if I move to Florida, to Arizona? Here in Michigan, we get a lot of snowbirds. A lot of people who, go away for 6 months, or they end up moving to where their children are in North Carolina, which is becoming a huge place to retire to. So that policy can then transfer to a funeral home there. You do lose that guarantee, like we've said before, but you will have that money to use at whatever funeral home you would like. There's also things you can put into place. Travel insurance, small policies that you can add on to the larger contract, so that if you do die while you're maybe snowbirding down in Florida, that policy would then help you get returned back to Michigan for your burial. So there are things in place as well that you can use if you do travel a lot, or you have some of those other considerations. What if my mom's in a nursing home and we need to spend down to go on assistance? This is a huge one we get, where people call us and are in a huge rush because it's going to be the end of the month and the nursing home is trying to get you on some state aid and on government aid, and they say you got to spend down and you got to take this because this is being considered an asset. And mom has this pre-funded funeral and the state won't give her benefits because we have this asset. It is actually a really simple step to take. You just have to go to the funeral home. There is a form. It's called an irrevocable form. We fill it out, we sign it, we give it to you, you take it and have the social worker sign it, and it's put on file, and it alleviates the asset of that funeral. Now, there are caps in different states that have a different capped amount that you can have in a funeral contract. So you can't go and like put $50,000 in towards your funeral to kind of shelter money. Once it's been made irrevocable, you can never have it back also. You can never have that money back to your family. So let's say you put in $20,000. Even that's going to be more than the cap, but let's just say you put in $20,000 into your funeral account and you make it irrevocable. Well, at the time of death, if your funeral only cost $10,000, your family cannot get that money back because the state has given you aid for however long. You can't get money, your family can't get money back then from your funeral account. So they've put these protective steps in place so that basically they don't get screwed in the deal. And so that money has to be used towards anything towards your funeral. If the funeral home is already paid for, that you could use it towards a headstone or towards luncheon or towards anything funeral related. If there's anything above and beyond that doesn't get used, it actually rolls to the state back into a fund that they have. But it is a quick process to get it made irrevocable. If you do have to spend down, and that's the terminology that's used. What happens if I die on vacation? What if, I'm down in Florida and I die? Do I call a funeral home there because my money's back up in Michigan? Or, how's that all going to work? What you want to do is call your end funeral point. So if you want to be in Michigan in the end and be buried in Michigan, call Michigan. The Michigan funeral home will then contract with a local funeral home to get you transported back to where you need to be. They will be able to do that more cost effectively than if you called a Florida funeral home and called the Michigan funeral home, because then you're essentially hiring two funeral homes. What you want to do is just hire one funeral home that's going to coordinate all of it for you, and they're going to get professional fees rather than straight off the price list. So it's going to be less costly for you in the long run by just calling the one place. Now, life insurance. So a lot of people have life insurance policies that they've carried throughout their life, and you want to use that towards paying for your funeral. So if you haven't had to cash that in to spend down along the way, what happens is you would bring that copy of that policy, so the funeral, with you to the arrangement or to the pre-arrangement. So the funeral home would need the name of the company and the policy number. They would call, they would make sure that that policy is in good standing and find out who the beneficiary is. Now, insurance companies have been getting stricter and stricter about the information they give and who they give it to. So they will at least tell us if it's in good standing. And that's what the funeral home needs to know in order to be able to use it as an asset towards your funeral. We do run into where the policy holder has cashed the policy in and the family never knew. That's a hard conversation to have with a family, to let them know, hey, you thought you had $20,000, but there's no money there because Bob cashed it in at some point during his life, and he used that money already. And that's so heartbreaking to have to tell a family, because then you're starting from scratch, and a lot of times there's no other funds that have been set aside, so you have to come up with a new plan. So that's really hard to do. But say you want to use that life insurance and it's in good standing, most funeral homes will do what's called an insurance assignment. So along with the claim forms and the death certificate, there's a form that would be notarized that the beneficiary signs to assign the portion of the bill to the funeral home. So then when the life insurance company cashes out that policy, they would send X amount of dollars to the funeral home and the remainder would go to the beneficiary. So that most funeral homes will take as cash in hand. So as long as they know it's in good standing and they have that assignment signed and they have the claim form signed, they will use that as the by day of service payment. Now, the funeral home may charge a fee for that. They may charge like a $150 life insurance assignment fee. That fee covers the phone time that's spent, the paperwork time. I've spent up to 8 hours before doing life insurance for one call, for one family. That's a lot of time spent on the phone, on paperwork. So do the math, $125 worth of labor time is actually pretty inexpensive when it comes to that fee. And they also, the funeral home is putting out all of your cash advances for you right up front. Insurance companies sometimes don't pay for 90 days. So the funeral home's actually acting almost as a bank for you, putting out that money until they're getting paid 90 days later. So there's a lot of benefits that the funeral home is giving you by allowing you to do that insurance assignment as a form of payment, which is really cool. So you can do the trust, you can do insurance assignment, or you could do an insurance policy ahead of time. I have never been licensed to sell insurance. I've never needed to be with any of the funeral homes I've worked for. However, you can work with an insurance provider to do an insurance policy rather than a trust for a funeral policy. What allows that policy to not be considered an asset is because it's tied to a funeral home. So rather than like the $10,000 policy or $100,000 policy you may get through your work, those eventually can be considered an asset. So if you do have to go on state aid or go into a nursing home and do a spend down, those policies eventually have to be cashed in. And so a life insurance through a funeral home won't have to ever be cashed in because you can easily transition it over to an irrevocable insurance policy. Just like any other type of insurance, there's also some benefits and in ways that, if you die while you're paying on it, it'll pay off this amount, or after so many years, it will pay off in full. So there's different types of policies and different ways that you can do. So you would need to work with an insurance agent at a funeral home to get one of those policies in place. So it depends on your age and your health condition when you go to make prearrangements, whether they would put your money in an insurance policy or in a trust. So there's just two different ways to do that when you meet with a funeral home. So hopefully this video covers the pre-funding and insurance and trust and insurance assignment questions that you had about funding a funeral. If you have any other questions, by all means, post the questions below and I will get you answers. And it might be something that I need to do another video to expand on some of this information more for some of the viewers. So post those below, and by all means, make sure you subscribe to the channel, and I will see you at our next video. Bye.